where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. We are all shaped by our values, genetics, upbringing, experiences, and our environmental influences, which could be many in these days of digital mania. Now, to what degree each of these factors shape us is as varied as the diversity we are born in. One such experience is conflict or war, which can make or break people. Today, I have the pleasure of bringing a guest who has not just been shaped by his experiences, but used those to shape not only his future experiences, but those of millions between the East and the West. Meet Lakshita Saji Prelis, who is the Director, Children and Youth Programs, Search for Common Ground, and co-chair, Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. Saji has supported intergenerational peace-building efforts in over 35 countries and is the recipient of several accolades and awards. He also co-founded and directed the Peace Building and Development Institute at the American University in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Saji, for joining us today.
Thank you, Meenu. It's great to be here.
Now, you have done a lot in the world and earned many accolades. Who are you beyond the labels that the world has bestowed upon you?
I am a person who was born in Sri Lanka, and there were several things in Sri Lanka that really shaped my life growing up as a young boy. Before I knew who I am, before I knew the world around me, the world was shaping me already. And I maybe share three turning points in my life that really anchored and gave me some definition of my path ahead. One was going back to the 70s, growing up, my parents and my grandparents telling me not to go out with groups of more than three boys because of the communist regimes in the country, the social movements in the country, and the government's feeling threatened at the time by that. So we were asked not to go out in more than three or four boys together. And I was curious of why, but I just listened to them because you just honor what your parents and elders tell you. And that led to the understanding how important respect is to my parents, to your elders. The second part of it that led to in 1983 the war in Sri Lanka broke out, the civil war in Sri Lanka broke out. And I often thought the conflict is something far away, it doesn't affect me. But within a couple of days, it came to my own backyard, to my own street, and into my own neighbors' houses. People I was playing cricket with as a young boy, their houses were burnt. Some of them were hacked to death and burnt alive. And I was at a very young age a witness to some of the most horrific things that humans can do to each other. But at the same time, during this period, I was witnessing something very confusing. I was seeing people from my background, ethnicity, doing ugly things to others who were from a different group, a minority group of people. But at the same time, people in my own group were hiding the so-called enemy in their homes, protecting them, feeding them, caring for them, and clothing them. And I was confused why we are able to do so much evil and at the same time do so much good. And really confused me why we are able to do both at the same time. And that's one of the turning points that led me to try to understand why this dichotomy that we have about good versus evil. And the third turning point was, I guess, in Sri Lanka again, the Asian tsunami happened on Boxing Day. And I saw how over 30,000 people lost their lives in moments of a few minutes. A month after the tsunami, I was traveling across the country, and in the southern part of the island, I went to a school. The school was already in session. It's hard to imagine when 30,000 people lost their lives, over 80% of houses are damaged, everything is destroyed. And here they are in school, boys wearing blue shorts, white shirts, black socks, black shoes, girls wearing a white dress with a tie and the emblem, white socks. And here they are in school after so much loss. And one of the boys I was talking to, he told me vividly how he witnessed seeing how his parents lost their lives to the waves. His grandparents lost their lives. And in the schools, I was talking to teachers who have witnessed their own children die, and now they're having to teach others who are not their children and the trauma that they might be going through. But this boy named Patu was telling me how he witnessed it. And after all this grief, I asked him, well, what do you need from anybody? What do you need? He said to me, I know my parents are dead, but I want to still make them proud. And I want to make them proud that I can do well in this world. I'm still getting goosebumps thinking about it because at that moment he was telling me something that I couldn't imagine I could do. And the second question I asked was, well, what do you need for that? He said, I don't need anything. My sister is studying for her O level exams soon. She lost all her study notes. If you can help get some study notes for her, that would be very helpful. This is a 14-year-old boy. He just, when you ask him what he needs, he wants to make his what he wants, he wants to make his parents proud. What he needs, not something for himself, for somebody else. The selflessness, powerful moment of gravitas of loss and trauma was tremendous. And I asked myself, would I be so forthright and selfless in a moment like that? And he told me how it was a crowning moment for me to recognize the power of how young people see the world. And I've seen that over and over again in conflict settings, in disaster settings, how young people rise up, selflessly try to serve others. And that's one of the reasons why I dedicated my life to serving young people in settings like that. That's a long, short story about some of the turning points of who I am and what made me who I am today as a peace builder.
Just to get the timelines right, the war that you were just talking of was in the 80s, right?
That was right. Early 80s, 83.
And when was the tsunami?
It's 2004. The tsunami was in 2004.
And how old were you then?
Oh my gosh, I'm 55 now, so I didn't study math.
I was just trying to understand the impact and how the tenderness of the age, sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't. People from a very young age can also be very wise, at times even wiser than the definitely older ones.
Yeah. So that boy I told you, his age was he was 14 years of age when he witnessed this thing, experienced this, and how he was selfless in his thought about who needs help the most. And that was his story at the age of 14. It was in 1983 that I witnessed brutality of the war and saw it up close and personal in 1983, and now it's 2024. So that's one of the turning points that I realized we can't afford to kill each other through our problems or hurt each other to address our grievances. I was confused at the time why we are able to do it, but it was later in life that I learned how to do it better without using violence.
So when were you in Sri Lanka? Because at some point you moved out.
My family was in Sri Lanka. I left Sri Lanka and landed in Los Angeles, California in 1989, January 20th, around 2 p.m. when my flight landed in the US. I left Sri Lanka out of embarrassment and fear of the war getting more ugly. And I also left because I met this young woman, fell in love with her, and she migrated to the US. So I followed her to the US. But that didn't work out. But that journey of coming to the US helped me move on a very different trajectory in life because of that.
When you arrived in the US, in many ways you would have been, I guess, homeless.
If I came to the US, I was going to a community college in the US. I had my parents help me enough to make money for one semester of tuition, and I was able to show I had enough money to pay for school. But I became homeless and I was living on the streets for about 3.5 months because I couldn't afford to pay rent. My parents, of course, didn't know that. There was some amazing experience that I had when I was homeless. I got to understand what the power of not having anything and at the same time having a lot. What I mean by that is I saw, now give me a story then. Uh, there was a, around midnight every night, Pizza Hut close to where I was staying was shut in, closing down for the night. And oftentimes they throw their pizzas, leftover pizzas into the dumpster. So I knew after midnight that if I went there, I could probably get lucky to get some free pizza from the dumpster. So I went to the dumpster and got pizza. And there was one evening as I was walking back to where I was staying, there was a woman with her kids walking in the opposite direction towards me. And the kids looked at my pizza and stretched his arm. One of the boys and the girl stretched their arms towards me to get a pizza slice. They didn't have to utter a single word. I understood what hunger meant because I was also hungry. And then I gave them the whole box of pizza I had, and I kept going back home. A day or two later, I saw these two kids come and give me a big hug. Here again, when people are completely powerless, hungry, and no money at all, they're showing the value of gratitude. So when they don't have any, they have so much because of the gratitude and the love they have for them to others and how they show appreciation and kindness to others. Again, two examples, one from Sri Lanka, here's one from the United States, in the homeless people from the streets, showing the power they have despite not having anything. And I was really deeply touched by that. Again, two young people coached and guided by a young woman who was also homeless to make their children be good people in the world. And I was like, how can we support and amplify these stories of people like this? Was what enabled me to think about how people deal with grief, how people deal with trauma and tragedy and loss and powerlessness, and yet rise above that.
That's an amazing story of compassion. You must have also felt uprooted.
I felt uprooted and found my new grounding. It's this the dichotomy, the duality of life, the ups and the downs, the positive and the negative. I felt uprooted because I was homeless. I felt disconnected because, and at the same time embarrassed because here my parents have high hopes for me. In South Asian context, parents want the only four career paths I was talked about was being a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, or something along those lines. And here I was in the United States, not wanting to study medicine because I couldn't stay up at 3 in the morning memorizing Latin terms. And that was what I thought what the doctors do is to memorize Latin terms and heal people. And I couldn't see myself doing that. But yet I wanted to heal people. So I felt embarrassed that I was homeless because I couldn't tell my parents that. And at the same time, I found myself because I was feeling lost and I was feeling displaced because of people's kindness. And I found my community at the community college itself, where I went to school and spent more time there and got involved with student activism and learned a lot of things about my own culture, my own race from being outside the country than while I was in the country. I didn't recognize the privilege I had as a singular boy growing up in a family in Colombo, in the city, till I actually left. But the conflicts opened my eyes to it, but the conflict opened my heart. I opened my eyes when I left the country to see it from afar about the issues that I was going through in Sri Lanka and the privileges I had that I didn't know I had. When I saw African Americans having issues that they were experiencing through racism, it was through their experiences that I learned more about myself and the privileges I had too.
When you say that you found a community at the community college, you mean a community of like minded people from Asia?
No, it was like-minded students about dealing with injustices they were seeing in the world around them. So it was student groups who were involved with environmental issues, student groups who were involved, interested in racial justice issues, student groups who involved interested in LGBTQI issues. And I was exposed to all these things that I didn't have a language for or didn't understand that they were even issues till I was in this place and they brought me into their circles. And that led me to run for office in community college. I ran for office and became an officer in the student government at community college. And through that experience, I was starting to understand what different struggles people have. It was not Sri Lankans, it was all these other folks from Latin American countries, from African countries, and young Persians and Iranians who were there, all these other cultures that were in Los Angeles in the Woodland Hills, California area that I was exposed to. It was through them that I was learning about me.
That's interesting. So it was a multi ethnic group and it sort of exposed you and made you aware of their ideas and feelings as well. You also mentioned that you got to learn more about your culture while you were out of it.
As a singular boy growing up in Sri Lanka, I was blind to the kinds of privileges I was having. As a young boy, how parents and others took care of me. I didn't have to cook for myself. I didn't have to do any of this. And at the same time, how my people who are my religion and ethnicity and were able to live without fear because we were Sinhalese. When the war broke out in the Colombo area, it was people like me who were doing horrendous, ugly things to people who were slightly darker skinned because they happened to be Tamil. Different group, in a different belief system, different language, and different geography in some sense. And I didn't understand that till I left to go in the US because other people had similar experiences. And we were talking about it. We were talking about how young Latin American women, Hispanic women were feeling excluded in their own community. We were talking about how Hispanic men were thinking about their issues. We were talking about how Black young men and women were feeling the racism they were experiencing in the community. They couldn't, how afraid they were to walk on the streets they were, because they thought they might get arrested simply because they color of their skin. It was that experience and exposure that enabled me to ask myself, because I was deconstructing racism of other people, communities, but never deconstructed my own racism that I had. It was when I heard that, I was asking myself, am I racist? Do I have privileges that I don't even check and ask myself that I enjoyed when I was in Sri Lanka? It was those conversations led me to ask more in an introspective journey of myself to see what those were like. That's how I learned about the privileges I had from Sri Lanka.
You mentioned the word racism. How did you process and handle that?
Oh my goodness, I faced it on a constant basis. Often, when I was in student government, I was a minority among other leaders who were not from another country. They were all white Americans. I experienced it when people spat on me, pushed me around, and told me to leave the country because I didn't belong there. And I've experienced it in subtle ways. Those are the overt ways. The subtle ways is so asking me questions about the simple things like, "Oh, you speak very good English," to, "Oh," automatically thinking because I was brown, because I was a foreigner, that I didn't have money and I didn't have power and access. Now, part of that is true. I didn't have money. I was homeless for a while too, right? But they were seeing only certain sides of me, not the full me. And automatically thinking, because I was a person of color, that I was not a person of stature, I was not a person of intellect, I wasn't a person who was capable of doing important things in the world. Those things actually challenged me to do more.
So, when you faced racism, both overtly, which I think must have been actually quite shocking, as well as not so overtly, how did you feel and how did you react?
I first thought I need to keep my mouth shut and not cause ripples. And there's, now I can say as an educated person that there are roots in this in colonialism, going back to not messing up things, not not shaking the pot, so to say. You keep your head down and do your work. So at the same time, I realized if you don't talk about it, people might not know about it. I was involved with when President Clinton was appointed, he started this conversation on race in the United States. And I was part of the group that actually helped shape at the university campuses, especially community colleges, how to think about a dialogue on race relations in the United States, in the community colleges itself. So I got trained to understand how to have that conversation, to show your vulnerability, but at the same time, show your humanity in it. So the person doesn't see you just as a victim, but see you as somebody who might have some ideas that people can learn from, and how to get to a place of understanding the other person and the other person's humanity and fear, and equalize it with your own humanity and fear. And that creates that mutual vulnerability. So you actually open the person's heart a little bit to listen to the other. So that kind of techniques I was learning because I wanted to challenge myself, because I was experiencing this. And I felt like I can't be the only one experiencing this. Others are struggling with it. And the last thing I would say on this, I think, is in Buddhism, I learned that everyone is suffering. When I was in school in Sri Lanka, we learned that everyone is struggling and suffering, and everyone has their own pains. And I remember that in this when it was experiencing this, somebody who is pushing me or spitting on me, they might also be in pain. Now, I didn't have the bravery or to think that, oh, this person is in pain at that moment. I was afraid, and at the same time, I was angry with the person. But soon thereafter, I realized that person is doing this because they don't know me. But at the same time, they also might be struggling or afraid just as much as I am afraid. And that's what enabled me to understand how to dissect this and engage on these issues without putting it away under the rug.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing the process because actually that's very important. The first instinct generally is to keep your head down because at some level there is your oppressor and then there is a victim. You wanted to push the envelope and you went through this process where you go beyond that, beyond those labels, and try and understand the other person. And yes, I agree with you. We don't know the other person's story. We don't know what is in their mind. We don't know what makes up the images and why these images are there. They're usually programmed. But I must say that you went about it in a very constructive way.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And I was like that too for a while. I felt I could live in my victimhood. Like everyone hates me. I'm the only one, person of color in the room. Oh, poor me. And I realized that's not very constructive for me because I was angry then. I was frustrated. That didn't help me understand the other. That's when I started to remember my Buddhist lessons when I was a child. I had not studied Buddhism after that, and I had not practiced it in that sense. But at the time, I remember that everyone is suffering. That message of everybody suffers resonated in my mind. And something came over me to realize even if this person may not like me, and even if this person is angry with me, because this person is suffering, I can't be angry with them all the time. And it enabled me to actually reconcile. I can tell you a story about reconciliation because of the ugliness of the war, and I said what I experienced. It was later at a workshop where I met another Sri Lankan who was Tamil, who had experienced amazing amounts of loss because of the war. People from my background had committed towards him and his community and his family. And I still had my biases because he was Tamil. Maybe he was a bad person. Maybe he supported a terror group. Maybe he did this. Maybe that. Those questions were in my mind. But the more I started to talk to him, I realized he was just as afraid as me. He was just as vulnerable as me. And after about 6 hours of talking about each other's pains, I recognized my pain is cannot be compared to his pain because I was still coming from a very privileged place. And I started to apologize to him, And at the end, we were both crying and hugging each other for what I felt was for about 15 minutes of hugging, holding each other. Heart to heart, I was feeling his love for me and my love for him go beyond the physical. It was a kind of a spiritual moment of being connected at a very deep spiritual level, going beyond our physical bodies of this costume we wear, so to say, to something much more deeper and powerful. And I felt his love for me, and just as much as I felt his love for me and my love for him. It was a powerful moment of healing from our wounds that we were carrying with us. I've seen the same thing in Los Angeles, where I was working with young gang members who had committed violent acts against each other and helped facilitate a process where they could reconcile from the crimes that they committed on the wounds, the trauma they had created in the other to actually, these are people who had actually committed some really violent acts and were able to come together and understand the reasons what led to that and to be able to move beyond it because the past cannot be recreated. This was all with young people also. So it was something about being young that enables them to sometimes forgive faster and look forward as opposed to let the baggage of the past burden you in the process. So there's something about being young and the ability for them to heal that is different from adults who hold on to the past and live in that past also. That's taking to another level of a conversation, but I just wanted to share that as well because I've noticed that quite a bit from around the world.
I totally understand and I'm with you there. Can you share another situation? Because I think that would be important to this conversation and how an example of overt racism and how you dealt with it. Because I think that would be a very powerful impact, however small or big. Because it's not just about small or big situation, it's the starting point that is important, the thought process, and a set of feelings that come together to form an attitude.
Yeah. I can give a couple of examples. One, the turning points, someone was telling me that I don't belong in the room. I'm going to try to not identify any people. So I'm going to just try to deal with the kind of the crux of the story with the examples without divulging anything about the person itself. But someone said privately to me that I should not come to these meetings I was participating in because the topics seem too complex, too big for me, that it's difficult for me to understand because I'm not American. And these are American issues I shouldn't be tackling. Then the conversation led to saying, I don't belong there because I was basically a brown skinned person. And that's essentially what was said. It threw me off guard, and I was, funnily enough, it was like I was laughing inside myself. It's like, is this person really joking or is this person serious? I couldn't figure out if it was a joke or if it was serious. And often I felt like there was a subtle humor in it to disarm the other, but the racial undertones were very deep rooted. It was very clear, but I didn't understand if it was a joke. So it was disarming. So I was confused. So the tactics I did was I realized this person doesn't know me. He has no idea who I am. So I need to get to know him. He was a powerful business person in the community in Los Angeles. He was a very influential person. So I started to get to know him. I sent him an email. Well, it was the beginnings of emails at the time. Emails didn't exist necessarily. It was a text message that led to an email conversation after. I sent him a text message saying, thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for trying to understand me, kind of thing. And then I kept showing up. I said, I want to learn. I'm curious. I really want to learn. So if I'm missing something, I don't keep missing it. I want to understand your wisdom. And it disarmed him. And the more I kept showing up, the less he was threatened by me. And the less he felt, I think the more he saw me, the more he started to understand me, who I am. And I spent time talking to him. I was asking him questions. I let him speak. And there's gender dynamics here, men in power. With the more you want them to speak, the more they get disarmed. and all that. I can learn. I understood that dynamic also, not late, not at the time, but later. But I just wanted him to speak, and more he spoke, the more he felt comfortable with me. And I was noticing a difference in his tone. I was noticing a difference in his language. And then something magical happened. He asked me more questions. So, where are you from? What was it like growing up in your country? What was that war like? And then he started to see me for like, oh, poor Saji, you have experienced something very difficult. So that's when I realized he's starting to see me. Again, not like it was from a place of sympathy, but it's still a huge progress for him from not knowing me and feeling like I don't belong to wanting to actually have a conversation and learn about me. But the basis of it is keep press showing up, keep talking, but not being arrogant and asking questions, but asking, being curious and being very patient about the process because I wanted him to recognize who I am. I wanted him to know me because I feel like he doesn't know me. So those are some of the steps I took to do that. There are lots of other examples of tactics I've used in these spaces. In Oregon, I was appointed by the governor to serve a 2-year term as a commissioner for the state of Oregon on higher education and financial aid issues. And I had to go through a Senate confirmation process. And I was prepared for the confirmation hearings. And I was the first person of color to be appointed for this position and the first non-citizen, non-resident person to be appointed. I was the first foreign student to be appointed for a position like that, where I don't even qualify for federal financial assistance. I'll be deciding on issues that impact not people like me, but citizens and residents of the state of Oregon in the United States. And one of the questions that was asked was, you're a foreign student. Why do you think you are qualified to serve this position when you're not even a citizen or resident? It's a very legitimate question. It's a harmless question, but there are other tones underneath that. If I recognize in the culture of it, I recognize there were other levels of that this person was talking about. So I was talking about why I belonged in the room, why I belonged to be appointed, and why I think I will be qualified for it, even though I didn't have a citizenship or residency or qualify for assistance. I turned my powerlessness into my position of power. And it came from a place of being humble and being sincere. And those are things that I've learned that that's the only way we can deal with our fears. That's the only way we can deal with our grievances. And not by relying on our machismo or macho attitudes, but our consciousness, not our ego, so to say.
You used the word belonging, which is a very large word with many nuances. What does that really mean for you? And where do you feel you belong? How do you feel where you are right now? So, is it a country, place, person, or nothing at all? As I said, it's a very big word with many nuances, and I think you've gone on a deep journey, not only outside geographically, but you have dug deep inside yourself. Having said that, do share.
Thanks for asking this. A sense of belonging is something so important for many people, including me, right? But the belonging is based on a set of identity markers, personality markers. For me, when people ask where I'm from, I often say I'm from Sri Lanka because that's where I grew up. But here I'm talking to you while I'm in Washington, D.C. And there are many different identities we have that ground us where we are. So, but I often say, oh, I'm from Sri Lanka, but I live in Washington. And say, and to kind of show the multiple hats, the multiple identities that we bring to where we are. The other side of that belonging is where I'm at. I am in Washington, D.C., so I belong here in Washington, D.C. When I in Cameroon in a few couple of weeks, I'll in Cameroon because my presence is there. And I bring the volume of my life experiences to that place to engage with my totality with the people I'm interacting with. So to me, the sense of belonging to a place and a space of physicality. I'm consciously now I before I couldn't, but now I can I consciously know this is a temporary place. I am in Washington, I'm temporarily here. But when I'm here, I'm fully here. the temporal nature to this concept of belonging is important to understand. So we are not fully attached to some of these things. Part of the reason why we see war and violence in around the world is because of these artificial things we create in our minds about boundaries, ownership, land, and a sense of ownership and control and belonging to that sense of control. And I've realized the fakeness around it because of the temporary nature to it. So if you ask, like so you ask me about more belonging, to me I see that sense of belonging in this vastness space of, like, I suppose the limiting space of belonging to a person, belonging to a ethnicity, tribe, religion, location, geography. All these are very ultimately very fleeting. I've realized it's our ego that makes us create these artificial things that give us sense of identity when we are so much more than that. And it's once we recognize that, and I recognize sometimes the foolishness of those things, I am able to overcome them so that it's harder for people to hurt me because they're not hurting me as my conscious being. They're hurting all these temporary things, and I'm able to differentiate it that way. That was a little deeper than the sense of the physical concept of belonging, but that's where I am. That's what I believe in.
Right now, you're in that space because you did a lot of digging in time. Now, belonging is really a big word, especially in today's times as well, when a lot of people have been displaced for no reasons of their own because of war, conflict, and so on. And there are other people who have moved because of economic reasons, or for relationships, or just to go and see. Global mobility has escalated. So the word has taken on multiple meanings. I'm trying to break down that word for a lot of people out there. And you would understand that because you were born and brought up in a certain place, and then you went to another place. You went through a certain set of experiences. So, in your case, as I understand, you belong everywhere in terms of geography. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm attached in the sense of physical, like, oh, Washington, D.C. is a beautiful place. I like being here. So, in that sense, but I'm here. I know I'm here only temporarily. I don't know for how long. I might, so things can change in life. But you brought up a couple of important points here about the sense of belonging is sometimes ripped from you when when you're displaced against your will. You had no choice, but you have to leave. And then I've witnessed this. What you carry with you is a simple bag of most precious items, whether it's clothes or pictures that you're taking with your mobile phone as a way to connect and feel you're connected to somebody else, connected with the outside world while you're displaced. I've spoken to people who are on the migrant path who recently went through a migration, was forced to flee, and when they moved to a country and then to a third country, and they said, for me, what I had with me was a few precious things that I could hold on to that was from home because I lost everything. So it was pictures, so it's connected to memory. Two is a sense of being connected to the outside world when I was alone. So a phone was something else, right? The third is mobility, the ability to move. Two people, one who was physically disabled, the other one who was physically able. One who had the physically disabled had no feet, no legs. He was on crutches, and he still went through the treacherous path to move from one country to the other because he was determined to go to belong somewhere else because he knew if he could turn back, he will be dead. And yet he was striving for belonging somewhere else that was imagined. He was imagining life. Just like when I left Sri Lanka and I thought coming to the United States, I would belong in the United States, a world of greatness that Hollywood has created for us in our imagination. When I came here, I saw the veil was taken out. Little by little, I was starting to see the things that I didn't realize. I knew. So belonging is kind of also based on imagination and reality as well. What you create in your mind of some place, it is almost like, oh, I want to go there because the grass is green on the other side. I want to go there. But once you get there, you realize the grass may not be as green. I saw that with my own eyes. What I saw from Hollywood versus what I was seeing in reality of people homeless, people being shot and killed by drive-by shootings. That I never saw on television. I saw the glamour. I didn't see the other side. Same thing with some of the people I've engaged with who are going through, they're coming to that place. The displacement, people have no choice but they get displaced. And what they hold on to is what they used to start. Recently, I was speaking to a person who was displaced from Afghanistan, who migrated to another country. They had very little in them. Now they've created a whole new sense of identity and belonging in another country, which is where they are now at. And the way they are going about it is to make sure they can sacrifice so that their children have a stronger belonging in a third country where they can succeed academically, they can succeed in their work by getting a good education. So the sense of belonging changes for different people based on their experiences of today and expectations of themselves and expectations of others.
As you rightly said, belonging is a word which is different for different people for different reasons. That word, I personally feel, is shaping a lot of the way the world is moving right now, and the young are moving up, or they think they are moving up. They're not using that word, but it is all dependent on that because there are a lot of identity issues happening nowadays.
Yeah, just to kind of two cents to that, it's a really important point you're making. This sense of wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be acknowledged, and not wanting to be invisible. It's a very human quality as well. And the sense of belonging are almost connected to this sense of wanting to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. It's different for different people, for men versus women versus LGBTQI through migrant populations and others are all different. But there's a common thread about being acknowledged for your that you exist. Acknowledge that you're seen, not invisible, put to the sidelines, put to the back of the house as opposed to in the living room, in the front of the house. All those things are part of the human psyche. And I've seen it quite a bit. And often our memories play a role in living in the past or living in the present based on the past. And I brought this up about young people. I've noticed this even recently. We were talking about the conflict in Sudan and how the older generation were talking about 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, how their memories have shaped their worldview of today and based on that, what the country should be like in the future, based on the history of their past. And at the same time, younger people were saying, you're focused on the past when we are not sure we'll be living in the future. Our future is so bleak, we don't know what it's going to be like. We need to stop basing our past as a way to understand our future. We can change our future if we change our history, change our views of history. So there's a generational perspective that we see of younger generations saying, enough with the past. I think because they're not attached so much to the past as the older generations might be. And this is something where we see with third country nationals and where we hold on to the past. The older we get, we hold on to the past, the golden age or the good old days concept. Whereas for younger generations, there is no sense of identity that holds them to that because their worldviews are so different. The way they look at things, the way they are socialized into things are so different. There's a generational thing that I think we need to unpack in our understanding of humanity and our understanding of how to deal with the conflicts and the challenges the world faces as well. And it's a distinct thing of being young that enables them to see things differently than the older generations.
That's interesting. I like that line about where one feels heard and acknowledged. And I would extend that to a grade further, with where I would say where and with whom one feels heard, seen, and acknowledged. That in a place or a group of people, as a person where you feel then a sense of belonging. So, as you rightly pointed out, identity is very, very central to the whole concept of belonging. And as you rightly put it, about shaping the conversation about racism, that can also change the complete view from one side to another and come from a place of non belonging or not even thinking about the word to a place where one says, okay, I belong or we belong. Conflict, war, identity, belonging. These are very significant words in today's times. Saji's lived experiences and digging deep inside himself have shaped his path in life and transformed many more to arrive on the other side called peace. That, dear listeners, is for the next part of the episode. If you have been affected by war, racism, and other situations, and have gone through identity and belonging issues, do write in and share. Your stories matter. They make up the world. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.